Fairer Sex. Short Stories on Male Privilege. Number 8. The Casting Couch. Janie Barlow let the long-legged blonde enter first, then slipped inside while the doorman ogled the blonde's backside. Nearly there. She looked around. A few props, some chairs, piano music, thumping feet. Hey ho, the gang's all here, so let's have pretzels and let's have beer, went the song. No more dancers wanted, said the sign. Well, they needed Janie Barlow, they just didn't know it yet. A mirror. She patted her hair, then entered. A chorus line, arms swinging, legs kicking. Hey ho, the gang's all here, so let's have pretzels and let's have beer. A man was shouting instructions. He paced back and forth, his right arm swinging to the music. He was peremptory, exclamatory, impatient. Just a minute, where do you think you're going? Said a male voice. The owner of the voice stepped in front of her, hands on hips. Are you Harley Weinstein, the dance director, I mean? I'm Ted Healy, the assistant dance director. Well, I'm here to see your boss, Harley Weinstein. Sure you are, sister. I'm here for an audition. Can't you read? Said Ted Healy. No more dancers wanted. Pray allow me to escort you to the egress, milady. He mock bowed, right forearm across stomach, left arm behind. Is that Harley Weinstein over there? Janie asked, squinting slightly. I can't see clearly from here. I'll need to get a bit closer. You can see that he's awful busy easily enough. It's the sign you need to get close to, the one on the other side of the door. Try reading it this time. Janie Barlow removed her annoyed expression and replaced it with one of adulation. Oh, so you're Ted Healy. I love your work. Anything goes, right? How come you're an assistant? You can recognize talent for yourself. You don't need Harley Weinstein. You're every bit as good as Weinstein. Better. I wouldn't let Harley Weinstein get all the credit. During this praise, she fingered his jacket's lapel, as if admiring the herringbone weave. He grasped her roving hand by the wrist. It freed itself with a violent shake. He looked her up and down. You're too long in the tooth and too broad in the beam, he said. Out you go. He took her upper arm. Don't touch me, Janie said, shrugging him off. Back in the antechamber, she sat down. It was a tough grind. She was a natural dancer, a natural talent. She belonged on stage. She'd get there eventually, and she'd get top bill eventually. All she needed was her big break. Persistence counted in the end. Don't take no for an answer. All right, break it up, clapped Harley Weinstein from the other side of the door. The thumping feet and piano music ceased abruptly. Lunch 1 hour, shouted Ted Healy. Janie heard a male voice approaching the door from the other side. What it said was this. Oh, I don't agree. Dancing Lady's a tad old-fashioned, but it's got a cult following, and it should do rather nicely at the box office. This man entered the antechamber and came to an abrupt stop. So startled was he at the sight of the sobbing convulsions before him. He sat down beside her. What on earth's the matter? He asked. Janie turned to look at the man. Oh, I thought you were Harley Weinstein. The sobbing convulsions ceased, and she stood up. I'm Bob Casey, the producer of this show. She sat down again, and the sobbing convulsions recommenced. Can I possibly be of help? Asked Bob Casey. Men hate to see a woman crying. Avuncular and imbued with old-world courtesy, Casey offered the kerchief from his jacket pocket. She took the kerchief and held it to her face, but turned from him. I've never been so humiliated, said Janie. That man was so rude. Which man? Ted Healy, the assistant dance director. Bob Casey grimaced at the door. You're a dancer? He asked. Yes, I came here for an audition. He said I was too broad in the beam, she said, looking down at herself, and too long in the tooth. Outrageous, said Bob. You're entitled to your dignity. Now you just wait here while I go and have a word with Harley Weinstone. Bob Casey proceeded in high dudgeon to Weinstone's office, where he found the man eating sandwiches at his desk. Harley, there's a dancer I'd like you to take a look at, said Bob. Don't you think I'm capable of picking my own dancers, said Harley. Take it easy, said Bob. You'll just need to give her an audition. An honest audition, that is. No brush off. I'm busy. I haven't got time to indulge your ladies. I resent that, said Bob. Well, what's her name? Asked Harley. Janie Barlow. Never heard of her, said Harley. I found her crying because of what that oaf of an assistant said to her. You want me to give her an audition because she was crying? Ted probably caught her sneaking in here. They're always doing that, interrupting rehearsals. Well, I don't know about that, said Bob, but I'm sure some minor role will do. I thought you said just give her an audition. That's right, said Bob. Audition her, and then give her a job. Now look here. Remember what I told you when I took this job. I expect a free hand. I'll make an exception just this once, but there'll be no elephants in my show. If she's an elephant, she's out. All right. Harley stood up, walked to the office door and shouted, Ted. The man came into the office. Send this Janie Barlow in here. After a couple of minutes, the aspiring Corinne duly arrived. So you claim you're a dancer? Harley asked her. She looked at Bob Casey, who laughed uneasily and opened his eyes to Harley. Don't let him intimidate you, said Bob, patting Janie on the shoulder. I'm sure you'll be fine. Well, I have a meeting to go to. Bob Casey left. Harley motioned Janie to sit down. She did so and crossed her legs, left over right. Then after a few seconds, it was right over left. A few more seconds, and it was again left over right. Her skirt struggled to cover the thighs that were sheathed in black nylon. I've got good legs, she said. So I've noticed. Oh, it's so stuffy in here, she said, leaning toward the whirring fan that sat on Weinstone's desk. She closed her eyes, exposing her purple eyeshadow, bathing her face in the cool draught of air. She beckoned to the air, her hands moving in slow motion. Strands of her hair stirred and lifted to right and left. She tilted her head and smiled. Harley watched her for several seconds with arms folded, then chuckled. He said, You do realize there's only one thing that'll get you into this show, don't you? What do you mean? She said in an indignant tone. You like to dance? Oh, more than anything in the world, she said. You have a resume, I suppose? She took 2 sheets of paper out of her bag and handed them over. Harley had seen this so many times. Vagueness and euphemism. It usually meant exotic dancing of one sort or another. A high school pageant as well. He suppressed a smirk. You've taken classes at the contemporary dance school across town? He asked. Yes. A rather bohemian place, I know it, said Harley. You realize we're looking for tappers? Of course, that's my speciality. I wouldn't expect anything else. You may be a natural, you may be a flop. You never can tell. You might give everything you have and still find that it isn't enough. Yeah, I know, said Janie. Well, I tell you what. Let's see what you can do. You go on upstairs and get into your audition clothes. A few minutes later they reassembled by the piano. Music? Asked the pianist. 42nd Street, said Janie. Harley sat back and watched. Come and meet those dancing feet, went the lyrics. Well, not bad, thought Harley. Not as bad as he had feared. She wasn't an elephant, at any rate, but not a gazelle either. On the avenue I'm taking you to 42nd Street. She knew what she was doing anyway. She had studied dance at least. Hear the beat of dancing feet. There was something just a little bit ungainly. Could he improve it? He wasn't sure. The routine also had some rough edges. It needed polish. It's the song I love, the melody of 42nd Street. Yes, ungainly was the right word. She tapped as if her feet were slightly bigger or slightly heavier than they truly were. Ruby Keeler came to mind. Not so obvious on shuffle, but wings might be a problem. Occasionally she lost timing. She also tended to look at her feet. That always annoyed him, dancers looking at their feet. Well, practice would put it right. Probably. He could work with her. Probably. Naughty, bawdy, gaudy, 42nd Street. She came to a stop, bending to rest her hands on her thighs and breathing noticeably. Out of condition. Not an encouraging sign. He was tempted to ask if she had been clog dancing, but thought better of it. A few seconds of silence ensued. "OK, I'll give you a chance," said Harley. "Thank you," said Janey, jumping up and clapping her hands. "How soon are you available?" "As soon as you like." "OK, report for rehearsals 10 a.m. tomorrow. Ted, stick her in the middle line." "Yes, boss." Harley returned to his office, picked up his jacket and put his right arm into the sleeve. Janey entered and helped him on with his jacket. "I want to say thanks for my big break," she said. "You might not think it's so great once I've started working with you," he said. By the end of the following week, Harley thought he had made a mistake, that her big break was in fact a damp squib, that he'd have to fire her. She dropped her heels. She leaned back too far. She forgot her steps. She wouldn't stop looking at her feet, no matter how many times he complained. She didn't smile enough. You can't tap dance unhappily. That's impossible. You've got to smile. But somehow she didn't. She concentrated on technique rather than presentation and communication. Above all, she learned too slowly. He raised his concerns with her. "A dancer's allowed to make mistakes now and then," she said. "In rehearsals." "These are rehearsals. You aren't making them now and then either." Harley demonstrated the move. "Let's run through this once more. 2 shuffles to the right, spring on that, do a single shuffle step on the left, and a cramp roll on the right foot." "There's no need to mansplain," she said tersely. By the 3rd week, though, he was pleased to discern a professional sheen appearing. "I've been thinking things over," he said. "I want to try you out in the Powell number." He had cooked up a short homage to Eleanor Powell. Janey managed the double pullbacks and leaps admirably, but she couldn't do the high kicks and she couldn't do the turns. She also had a rather obvious problem with the tassets. Then on the 3rd attempt she staggered away, holding her right calf and with her face twisted in agony. Picking her up, he carried her to his office, where he placed her in a chair. Taking the other chair from behind the desk, he sat beside her and took her shoe off. He squirted some liniment on his hands, then raised her leg and ran his hand up and down her calf. "Straight now," he said. "That's it. Come on, keep it straight. This'll hurt a little. Let it go easy now. Wiggle your toe. Do some ankle circles." She winced. "Routine on that number's not too bad," he said. "Thank you. Even so, I'm sorry I asked you to do it. I don't think you're ready for something like that." "I know I can do it," she said. "I'll use Judy for the Powell number, I think, as I had originally planned." But you said I could have the power number. I did not say that you could have the power number. I said that I'd try you out for the power number, but I don't think you're up to it. There were tears. Then she ran from his office. 2 weeks before opening night, Harley entered the cafe and sat at the breakfast bar. He opened the newspaper, but just sat there thinking. There was a tap on his shoulder. "Well, fancy seeing you here," said Janey, as she took the neighbouring stool and sat down. "Just a coffee, please," she said to the waitress. "How's your calf?" he asked, looking down. "As good as new," she said, smiling, looking down and twirling her foot. "And remember," he said, "an advanced technique makes an advanced technician, not an advanced dancer." "Got it," she replied. "I'm ready for another tryout at that power number anyway." "It's too late now," he said. "I've given it to Judy. You shouldn't feel like you've failed. You've come a long way. You ought to be content with that. Remember, the show has priority above everything else." "Oh, don't patronize me," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's true, nevertheless. The show is more important than anyone in it. That includes you, and it includes me." That afternoon the whole cast watched as Judy danced the power number. When it concluded, they all clapped. Once the chorus of appreciative comments had died down, Janey said, "That was great, Judy." Then turning to Harley, she added, "What you said today at breakfast makes so much sense now." There were giggles among the assembled Coreans. Harley glanced at Ted. He found a salacious, impious, revolting grin. Well, he wouldn't give Ted the satisfaction of an embarrassed expression. Harley turned to look at Bob, to find embarrassment there instead. That afternoon, Harvey was sitting in his office talking to Ted when Bob entered. "You found another crying dancer?" asked Harley. "Not exactly," said Bob. "A different matter entirely. I'll cut to the chase, Harley. We cannot afford a whiff of scandal. Any funny business may ruin dancing ladies' prospects." "Funny business," laughed Ted. "After all the hoo-ha over Me Too," said Bob, "we must all be extra vigilant. Men have all the power, and they mustn't misuse it. To manipulate women, I mean. We must remove these miscreants from the world of showbiz once and for all. And to do that, we must believe what women say. That's what Me Too has taught us. If there's anything between you and Janey, there ain't. Well, if there is, there ain't." It was the day before opening night, and a party for all the cast was being held at the Hilton. Janey approached Harley, smiling. "I want to thank you for all you've done," she said. "I've learned so much." "Shucks, it's all part of the job, man." He saluted. She spoke not to his face, but to the kerchief of red silk in his jacket pocket. Her fingertips teased the limp silk that, folded so carefully, formed three distinct peaks, and which, plucked slightly, sprang back into place. She bit her lower lip, while turning her gaze on Harley's mouth. "It's just a pity you won't consider me for the power number," she said. "I have considered you." "Well, reconsider me, I mean." "It's a done deal now, anyway," he said. "Well, not necessarily," she said. "Parts can still be changed after first night. I've seen it happen loads of times. It just depends. Things happen. Priorities change." She continued, looking at his mouth. Several seconds of silence went by. "I love my wife," he said. Janey laughed affectedly. "A man can play away from home now and then," she said, her fingers returning to the silken pocket square. She brushed some fluff from his jacket shoulder. Bob walked up to them. "Hello, please excuse me for this vulgar but pleasingly brief excursus," he said to Janey, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Harley, there are a few financial details about those costumes we need to finalize. I brought the paperwork with me." That's fine, said Harley. You'd best come up to my room. Shall we say 10 p.m.? What's your room number? 450. There, it was soon over, said Bob, turning to Janey. I say, that's a lovely dress. It's really quite exquisite. Janey's evening dress, which was lime green, covered her right but not her left shoulder. A long glove of the same lime green covered her left arm. Harley looked her up and down, and making an obvious display, inclining his head and leaning slightly, first to left, then to right. Do you like it? Said Janey, turning to Harley and twirling slightly. It's not too small, but I'd say that you're in it rather a long way, he said. I wonder what the girl looks like who got the other half of it. A champagne cocktail splashed across Harley's face. Janey walked away. Harley took the red silk kerchief from his jacket pocket and began mopping his own face. Why is it, said Bob, that when a woman is confident and self-assured, men feel free to denigrate her as immodest? I've warned you about sexism more than once, and that includes your lewd jokes. I heard that joke on a 1940s radio show featuring Bob Hope and Betty Grable. It got a good audience response from what I recall, although Bob Hope's delivery was doubtless better than mine. Well, now we know better, said Bob. There's a continuum of sexual malfeasance. There's no essential difference between lewd jokes at one end of the sexual coercion and sexual coercion at the other. If a man makes lewd jokes, then he's more likely to engage in other forms of harassment too. Inappropriate comments. Jokes can be extremely damaging. That's because a joke is not just a joke. Lewd comments are a form of sexual harassment. So are compliments about a woman's dress. Nowadays. After me too, that is. Bob's eyes closed for a whole second. Harley laughed uproariously at Bob's discovery that he too was guilty of sexual malfeasance. Have you heard of Schrödinger's cat? He asked. What on earth's that got to do with it? Said Bob. Well, it's a concept from quantum physics. Schrödinger's cat is alive and dead at the same time. Only when observed does this cat enter a precise state, dead or alive, one or the other. Meaning? Asked Bob. Well, today we have Schrödinger's feminist. She's confident and self-assured, but she's also vulnerable and fragile at the same time. She can look after herself because she's strong, but needs protecting because she's weak. Only when men speak does she adopt one state or the other. Feminists loathe the distressed damsel trope until they hear a risque remark, that is. Then off they go to the fainting couch. Fetch the smelling salts. Those histrionics with the cocktail were put on partly for your benefit, partly to gain the moral high ground, and partly to exert political leverage. If you weren't such a wide-eyed, let's just calm down and enjoy the party, said Bob. We're all a bit tense. Change the subject. Later on in his room, Harley left the shower with a towel around his waist while drying his hair. There was a knock on the door. Cursing, he picked up his watch. 5 minutes to 10. Come in, he shouted, then took his clothes into the bathroom. I sure hope you don't want any further changes to the costumes, he shouted. Returning, he stopped in amazement. You shouldn't be here, he said. I just wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier, said Janey. Never mind, it's all forgotten. Consider me suitably chastened. It's also a pity you won't reconsider me for the Powell number. Janey, we've already... I know, but you tried me out for the Powell number, then put Judy in it instead. It might look a bit, it might look a bit odd. Odd? Well, we both know our conduct is entirely innocent, but others may see it differently. Do you remember the day of my audition when I was in your office and you said, you do realize there's only one thing that'll get you this job, don't you? Now I know what you mean, that only dancing would get me the job. But others might think that you were implying, well, other things. Obviously, you were looking at my legs with the eyes of a dance director. But if you look at my legs while saying that, well, it takes on a different meaning, doesn't it? Then there was the time I took a spill. You caught me when I fell. It was all very funny and all that. Everyone saw it and laughed. But your hand did end up on my backside. Ill-inclined people might say you contrived it that way. And you remember when I got cramp? You massaged my calf yourself. We have an official masseuse, you know that. I understand that you're only trying to help, and I know there was nothing in it. I'm only pointing out what people might say. Ted Healy saw you running your hands up and down my leg. As it happens, I didn't care for it. I didn't say you could do that, but it wasn't my place to say so. I didn't object because dancers like me have no power, and we must do as we're told. We both know there was nothing to it, of course. I only say what others might think. The massaging did go on rather longer than necessary, though, I thought. And now I'm here in your room uninvited, of course. But others might say that you invited me here to offer me the Powell number, provided I was, well, nice to you. As we know from the Me Too movement, nowadays a woman's say-so is all that's necessary to wreck a man's career. Not that I'd ever do that to you, of course. Harley Weinstone listened inattentively to this speech. He was in and out of it. He was also thinking about his wife and children. He already knew what his wife would say. Is this the girl you've been mooning about? She's half your age. You silly, silly man. There came a second knock from the door. It's Bob here, shouted Bob from the corridor. The end.